Good morning and welcome to another Seize the Day. I trust that you guys are waking up, feeling refreshed, ready to begin a new day. This is Thursday, November the 16th, and we have this opportunity to spend this morning together looking through the scriptures. So trust that you're engaged in this study with Deuteronomy. We have called it Turning Up the Volume because it's all about a generation of people who have been given an opportunity to hit the reset button, to finish what their forefathers had not been able to accomplish because of their own rebellion and their arrogance. And now they stand poised to enter into this promised land and into the blessings that God has been promising, all of which are contingent upon this covenant that they keep. So when God gives them this 10 commandments, it wasn't commandments to keep us from experiencing life in its fullest. It was just the opposite. It was so that we could experience life in its fullest. I'm sure, many of you who are watching this morning, have come to a position in your life where you recognize that there are some things that you thought were going to add value to your life. And what did they do? They took value away. Right? Isn't that true? And so consequently, if we're driving this car, we could be driving in the wrong direction. And what the Lord has done is given us these given us his commands, right? His decrees that keep us focused, that keep us on the road, that prevent us from encountering some unforced errors, right? Like here, you want to make sure that you're walking in a way that is going to help you to experience life and abundantly, and that's exactly what Deuteronomy is all about. It's trying to get them to turn up the volume so that they can hear God's voice amongst the clamor that is all around us. So we find ourselves now in Deuteronomy chapter 9, and in Deuteronomy chapter 9. It's all about the spiritual battle, right? It's all about this battle that's taking place within us, and it's all part of this spiritual warfare. So I'd like to just bring you back to this passage here in 9, and just recall a couple of things, right? It started with this overall assessment of what Moses was telling them in the very beginning of this chapter. He tells them that you are now about to cross the Jordan to go in and dispossess nations greater and stronger than you, with large cities that have walls up to the sky. People are strong and tall. They're Anakites. And you've heard it said, who could stand up against the Anakites? So there was this realistic assessment. They were going to engage an enemy that was greater, stronger, larger, right? And their only hope for victory was that the Lord would be the one who would cross over ahead of them, that he would engage this enemy in a way that would make it possible for them to drive them out. And so Moses is making this point that God is promising to go ahead, that he will be the one involved in circumstances. Numerous places in the Bible where you see God manipulating creation sometimes, right? Battles. There's one that comes to my mind. Jehoshaphat was engaged in a battle, going down into this valley, and suddenly it rained, and it basically took all of the chariots out of the game because they couldn't gain any traction in all of this mud. And so Israel had an opportunity to take them all out. Or how about when Gideon is going to fight all the Midianites, and it says that they were as numerous as the sands of the sea. And here they were all camped out in the middle of the night. What does God do? He says, listen, I want you to go. You're not going to take them on one-on-one because there was only 300 of them. Remember, Gideon had made a call, and from about 23,000, it whittled all the way down to 300. And then God says, okay, that's enough. That's all that we need for this battle. And I'm sure Gideon and them were looking at each other like, "What, are you crazy? Look at the valley. I mean, they're swarming with the Midianites." And God gave him a clay pitcher, put a torch inside, says, "I want you to surround this valley." And so they got up, and he says, "When you hear the horn, I want you to break the clay pitcher and hold up that light and just begin to scream at the top of your lungs," right? And what happened? In the middle of the night, all of a sudden you hear all these people yelling. You see these lights. You assume that behind those lights, there must be these great armies. And in the dark, you can't see. And you start scrambling around. Next thing you know, you're fighting each other. And the next thing you know, you lose heart and fear overcomes you. And the next thing, man, you're taken off. And that's exactly what happened. Gideon won this battle. Why? Because, see, God went before him. God orchestrated that whole scenario so that they would be victorious. And God's saying, "I'm going to do this for you. Don't worry about these guys. I have this, but you're going to have to come with me, and you're going to drive them out, and you're going to take over this land." But what was curious then, it said that they had to be careful, because when the Lord goes ahead of them to drive them out, they might draw the wrong conclusion. The correlation between them winning the battle and the evil of the nations, and they might draw the correlation that the reason why they're winning is they must be so much better than these nations, that they are morally superior to them. That's why it says in verse 4, "After the Lord your God had driven them out before you, do not say to yourself, 'The Lord has brought me here to take possession of this land because of my righteousness.'" Now, it's not because of their righteousness. So he says it plainly. It says it's not because of your righteousness or integrity that you're going in to take possession of their land, but on account of the wickedness of these nations, and also to accomplish what God swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God swore that he was going to give this land as a promise to Abraham, right? He says, your descendants will inherit this promise 400 years later. I will also pay pay back the wickedness of the nations in that time, and I will deliver you from bondage. All of those promises God had fulfilled. So what was taking place was actually a fulfillment of what God had promised them through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and God keeps his promise. It wasn't because they were so much better. In fact, he goes on to tell them, he says, God is giving you this good land to possess. He says, but you are a stiff-necked people. And that stiff-necked show is seen in the way in which they had rebelled against God. And so where is the enemy then? Is the enemy out there, or is the enemy within? Where is the battle? Is the battle on that battlefield, or is it inside of us? See, the enemy is one that manifests itself now as being self-righteous. That is going to produce all kinds of fruit. That kind of pride is going to act as a wedge between them and their relationship with God. And so Moses goes on now to tell them why this enemy is so dangerous. And he begins to tell them about the ways in which they have, rebelled against God. He tells them about the day that he brought them that God gave them the 10 commandments, and Moses brought them down only to find them worshiping a golden calf that they had fashioned. It was only 40 days after God had given them those commandments, and already they have broken covenant with God. Moses destroys the tablets, throws them at them, takes that calf and grinds it down into powder and throws it into the river. Yeah, like everything is not good. Like, what is the future for Israel now? What's going to happen? Is the same thing going to happen to this generation that has happened to the past? How's God? What is His will and purpose going to be completely thwarted? What is the path forward? And that's kind of like where we left it yesterday. And so I want to take some time today and have you continue in this passage. And I want you to look through Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 1 and 2. In Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 1 and 2, this is what it says. It says, "At that time, the Lord said to me, chisel out 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and come up to me on the mountain. Also make a wooden chest. I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke. Then you ought to put them in the chest." That chest was the Ark of the Covenant. Inside that chest would be placed the replacement tablets of this covenant that God had made with Israel. So what is this saying to you and me? I mean, think of it, this sign. God in his displeasure, says to Moses, this is not my people. And the covenant now is in shatters physically, but also in their by the result of their actions, right? They have completely disobeyed God. They have instead of remembering this covenant, that there is only one God, right? That there is they are to refrain from idols. That 40 days later, they completely lose heart. The next thing you know, they're going back to old ways. They think that calf is going to deliver them, that there is power somehow represented by this God, represented by this calf. Yeah, you see, this is this primitive kind of thinking that God had tried to remove from them. He already demonstrated his power and his might by bringing them out of Egypt, and now they're just sucked right back into it again. So all of this is happening, and you think this is over. And then, just to be clear, if you look at chapter 9 and you look at verses 22 to 24, I pointed out that Moses here points out like Taberah, Massa, Kirioth, all those places. They were places that you find in like Numbers 11 and in Numbers chapter 17. Those were places where Israel again rebelled against God. So why does Moses write this in? Because he wants them to know this isn't just one incident. This did not just happen one time. This was part of your MO. And the book of Numbers is filled with incidences where the people are rebelling, if not against God directly, they're rebelling against Moses, whom God has placed in his place. And so consequently, you begin to see that what Moses is doing here is revealing that this is something systemic. This is going down deeply into their hearts. And so the consequence of this, at the end of chapter 9, you think, well, what's the hope? We're right back to where we started again. Only this time the Lord says, I'm going to give them a do-over. And despite his initial reaction, what does he do? He chisels out he tells them, chisel out 2 stone tablets, come to me. And God writes on the tablets as he did the first time. And now they're put into this chest as a memorial, taking them with them, reminding them again of God's promise, of a covenant that he's making to them, to love them, and asking them in return to demonstrate that love towards him. So God is offering them a new beginning. Don't you see that? This is a new beginning. It's born out of God's forgiveness and his grace. This is all really about the amazing grace of God. And so when you look at this passage and you begin to read it, you see Moses goes on in verse 3 and says, so I made the ark out of acacia wood and chiseled out 2 stones. I went up on the mountain with the 2 tablets in my hand. The Lord wrote on these tablets what he had written before, the 10 commandments he had promised, he had proclaimed to you on the mountain, out of the fire on the day of the assembly. Like, just think about this again. Those tablets were written 40 years ago, and they had been they were broken. And now, because of that disobedience, God gives him another chance, and he rewrites those tablets. And now they are in this ark, and Moses is telling this story to those who may have heard about it, but they didn't live through it. That's like you look now and you go back, you'd have to go back 50 years to talk about Vietnam. You might have uncles that you have that still fought in that war, right? But for the most part, it's so far removed from this current generation, and it's only been, about five or 6 decades since that began. You can see how sometimes this history, man, it just lingers in the past. So this present generation that Moses is speaking to, he has to remind them about this story, about how those tablets wound up in that Ark of the Covenant. And it says, he tells them, the Lord wrote on these tablets what he had written before. The 10 commandments he proclaimed to you on the mountain, out of the fire on that day of assembly. The Lord gave them to me. And then I came back down the mountain, put the tablets in the ark that I had made as the Lord commanded me. And they are there now. Now, all of this that follows in verses 6 through 9, it's kind of interesting. These are kind of little narratives that are built into the book of Deuteronomy to kind of, they're almost like, if you've ever been in a play and you have the producer's notes on the side, telling people where they have to stand, who comes in when. So it's not just the lines of the play, but it's all of the production notes as well. Well, here, listen to what this says in verse 6. It says, the Israelites traveled from the wells of the Jachanites to Moseriah. There, Aaron died, was buried. So it's telling you that Aaron lived for a period of time, right? Remember, God said, I was going to destroy these people. I'm going to destroy Aaron for this act of idolatry. And Moses prays for them and for his brother. But obviously, Aaron lived, because now, years later, he dies. Eleazar, his son, succeeds him as priest. The traveling is to say that they are continuing on in this journey, right? And then he begins to share with them a little bit more about the tribe of Levi, who they were those who ministered at the tabernacle. And so they didn't have a land of their own like the other tribes did. So this is just commentary to let you know that God, in his second chance, things are moving forward. They were progressing. And so go back to verse 10 of chapter 10, and look what it says. It says, now I had stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights, as I did the first time. And the Lord listened to me at this time also. It was not his will to destroy you. Go, the Lord said to me, and lead the people on their way, so that they may enter and possess the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. Every time we come to these passages like this, I always want to reiterate to you, you notice that God made a promise, and that promise is being fulfilled. He swore to their forefathers, right? He swore to Abraham and Isaac, Jacob, that they would receive this land, that he would bless them, that they would find themselves in a position where they would experience God's favor. And not because they were so numerous that God chose them, right? Because they were so mighty. Oh, I can, like this is the best horse in the race, so I'm going to ride this one. No, God didn't choose Israel for that reason. And he certainly didn't choose them because they were, because of their integrity or their righteousness, as we just read here in Deuteronomy chapter 9. In fact, they were a stiff-necked people from the beginning. But God is doing this work of redemption through Israel so that that work could be declared to all the nations around them. That's why we're all sinners saved by grace. There's nothing that we're going to say, oh, I earned my way into heaven. It's always going to be about the grace of God that he demonstrates to us. That grace that God is showing, by the way, to the just and the unjust, grace that he provides in ways for those who love him and those who will curse him, right? That the rain falls, the flowers they grow, the food, the crops, continue. God is feeding the world. But how many people stop and remember that it's from his hands that all these blessings come? See, that's part of this problem, isn't it? So here, when he, God is answering Moses's prayer, and he winds up sparing, Aaron and this whole nation of Israel because of their disobedience. And now here they stand, this generation, and they're poised to begin. And Moses brings this whole thing up to them, not because they did this. This was their fathers that had entered into all this rebellion. Moses is just telling them, look, are you hearing what I'm saying to you? Because God, you're standing right now in this position because God gave you a second chance. He is enabling you to do what your fathers have not done. And the people that are now presented with another opportunity to turn up the volume on God's voice. The way forward is what it has always been. And that is, I want you to live as my covenant people. Moses is giving them all this instruction to motivate them not to trust in the wrong thing. Don't trust in your own self-sufficiency. Don't trust in your own self-righteousness, right? Don't trust in your in the strength of your back. No, we have to trust in the one who is able to do exceeding abundant beyond all that we can ever think or imagine. And Moses has been laying this out to them in a very unsugar-coated way to get them to remind him. So let me review something for you here in the last few moments. You remember that in Deuteronomy chapter 7, Moses reminded Israel that they were God's most treasured possession. But he was quick to remind them that the status was not to be misunderstood. Because God doesn't show his favoritism based on lineage, right? Not on nationalism. God's favor rests squarely on the disposition of a person's heart towards him. Their standing before God was never meant to foster a misguided nationalism. Just because God said, you are my treasured possession, didn't give them a free card. You entered into this promised land because you were keeping covenant with God. See, that generation that God took out of Egypt, that God said to them, you are my treasured possession, right? You are a holy nation, a royal priesthood, a people of my own choosing. All of those titles of commendation, they didn't mean anything if they turned their backs on God and walked in the same manner as those nations that he was going to dispossess? You see, you have to be more than you have to show your love for God more than just with your lips or with a heritage. You're born into this family of God not because of blood, but because of the Spirit of God that gives you new life. And you can see easily now, right, how people could walk around thinking, hey, I'm the salt of the earth. God said that we're the light of the world. But you got to act like the salt and you got to act like the light. Otherwise, what is the promise? In fact, if you really pay attention to those passages that Jesus gives us in Matthew chapter 5, when he calls them the salt of the earth, he warns them the salt could lose its savor and become good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled upon. And by the way, the light can be hidden. You could put it under a table. So don't hide your light. Put it on a stand. Let it give light to the whole room. Let your light so shine that men may see your good work and glorify your Father in heaven. God is not glorified just because we give him lip service. The blessing, the promise, the power that comes from a relationship with him is because we're walking in his way. So there's no room for a misguided nationalism. Just because you bear the title of most treasured possession, if you don't act like it, God's going to do to you what he's doing to these nations. What does he say in Deuteronomy 8? Deuteronomy 8, chapter 8, Moses added that their walk with God will require disciplined thought in good times and in trying times. The temptation exists for them to think of themselves as self-sufficient. But material blessing was God's blessing. God is the source of all blessing. Therefore, there was this pride, this hubris of self-sufficiency that would only prove to be a detriment to them. They would then rely on themselves rather than relying on the one who is the source of all blessing. So here we have nationalism that can get in the way, right? An overestimation of who we think we are as a people. We could also have an overestimation of our own self-sufficiency. And here in Deuteronomy 9, and 10, there's no room for self-righteousness. There's no room for this pride. Victory in the battles was not because they were better than those around them. The victories that they experienced came because God determined to judge evil, and God was going to fulfill promises. If we weren't in covenant with God, what made us think that we had any right then to those promises? No, all of these are warnings that have to be heeded so that they don't enter into the same mistake that their fathers did. Poised now on the brink of entering into this promised land, Moses wants to make sure that they are seeing clearly. And so what's the lesson? Ultimately, is that if you humble yourself before the Lord, he will lift you up. That's the lesson. You humble yourself before God, and he will lift you up. That's what Deuteronomy 9 and half of chapter 10 is all about. It's just adding on to this story of what not to trust in and to recognize the one who is the source of all blessing. Thank you so much, my friends, for being with me this morning. Tomorrow, I'm going to give you a New Testament example of this very thing that if you grasp this lesson and see what I'm going to share tomorrow in this New Testament passage, it will stick with you for the rest of your walk with Jesus, because you will always remember where your strength comes from. And your standing before God is never because you're so good. It's because God is good for you. He makes you alive. He raises you up. He's the one that seats you in the heavens in Christ Jesus. When you get to heaven, The only reason why you're going to walk through those gates is because Jesus died for you. And your life now is demonstrating the truth of that statement. So love him with all your heart, mind, soul, strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. God bless you, my friends. Go out, seize the day, never forgetting that we serve a God who is good all the time. And Lord willing, we'll close our week out tomorrow together. God bless.